Mega Man X5 was apparently supposed to be the final chapter in the Mega Man X saga where Zero dies and we all move on to Mega Man Zero. Much like Mega Man 6 was supposed to be the end of the classic series despite the to be continued in the corner of the screen. However, someone at Capcom liked money and they wanted another Mega Man game to cash in, and that's what we got. Now, while others had lamented that the series should have ended at 5 and not necessarily because of how the other games turned out, I will defend the continuation of the Mega Man X series. Just because Zero's story came to an end in X5 doesn't mean you can't have an X6. The game's best ending shows X continuing to fight the good fight with Saber at hand, so why not work from there? There was nothing stopping Capcom from making more X games, quality notwithstanding. X6, X7, and X8 had more than enough reason to exist. The only conflict was the inclusion of Zero in these games because his story has ended in X5, but as it turned out, he hit himself to repair himself and he's still around for another 3 games, so whatever. Released in 2001 for the Sony PlayStation, Mega Man X6 follows the template of the previous games. You start off with an intro level to familiarize yourself with the controls, then a stage select with 8 Mavericks to fight through, and onto the final levels of the game. Throughout these levels, there are additional items for you to seek out, including the usual heart containers, sub-tanks, and armor pieces for another pair of armor sets, the Blade Armor and the Shadow Armor. Also scattered about are stray Reploids waiting to be rescued, only this time they are threatened by nightmare creatures, and if one of these creatures grab a Reploid, they are infected and considered lost for good. And these Reploids sometimes contain parts that you can equip as your rank increases, so be sure to grab these hapless bots, or they will die, and you will lose their benefits. There are also additional boss fights in the interim, accessed by finding these teleporters that will lead you to another mini-stage of sorts. The first extra boss is a nightmare version of Zero that unlocks the real deal when you beat him. The other extra boss is High Max, a super robot who is nigh impossible to beat unless you have a weapon that can hurt him, but if you beat him you'll unlock the final levels of the game before clearing the 8 Mavericks. And then subsequent visits to these alternate levels will pit you against Dynamo, the mid-boss from the previous game who will drop Nightmare Souls when defeated. Yeah, we'll get to that later. So for obvious reasons, your only character at the beginning of the game is X, who plays pretty much the same as he did in the last game, wearing a nerfed version of his Falcon armor from the previous game, and now equipped with Zero's Saber as a secondary weapon. And much like Zero's Buster in X5, the X-Saber sucks. It's just one slow slash that's fine for clearing away certain obstacles or quickly disposing of idle enemies, but becomes significantly less fine when it involves moving targets. It's always a good sign when you introduce giant balls in your intro level to take down with my saber, and yet I still have to back up a bit to deliver more hits to kill a ball. And then I'm like, fuck it, just take the hit because I don't care. Sure, you could air dash over some of the balls, but they give you balls to take down, not avoid, and fuck it, I don't care. Unfortunately, Mega Man X6 is very much a case where fuck it, I don't care is the predominant attitude that persists when playing through its various poorly conceived levels, and when you have a lot of moments where that befuddle you to the point where you stop giving a shit and just run through it with reckless abandon, well, you're not having a lot of fun with this game, are you? Well, actually, you know what? Since we touched on, let's touch on these levels, shall we? Mega Man X6 has some of the worst levels in Mega Man history, hands down. The level design is so reprehensibly awful that even the Mega Man DOS games have better level design. Some of the best levels in X6 even, like the jungle level, Commander Yamek Sauce or whatever, is still bad, whether it be regenerating grasshoppers every once in a while or hopping on turtles to navigate a bed of spikes, but the camera is positioned to a degree where half the spikes you can't even see, so if you want to make a dash or two to circumvent all this, you might run the risk of landing on spikes. That's a minor inconvenience compared to some of the other levels. What makes the level design awful is the over-reliance of gimmicks and gimmick levels to the degree that they practically dictate the pacing. Hey, we've got Crusher things in the past, so why don't we make a level where almost 3/4 of it has you avoiding death from this massive Crusher from above? Let's make a level where it seems like you're fighting this badass robot throughout, but you're really just moving along in a straight line and every once in a while you have to take down a wall. How about the cave level where you're fighting these donut-like sub-bosses every other segment, and each subsequent fight, instead of being more challenging, is more annoying and frustrating than usual? Or my personal favorite, the museum level, where you touch these holographic totem poles that will warp you to some randomly selected segment with no rhyme or reason to it, which means finding extra bits like armor pieces and heart containers in this level is down to random luck rather than any semblance of clever thinking or even skill, for that matter, that rewards the player. Oh, and ice physics. Because apparently now X can't slide on walls and he slips all over the place. We've gone a long ways down since X when there was no ice physics whatsoever and ice meant nothing to X. Goddamn, if you wanted another sign that this series went down the shitter quickly. Now look, gimmicks are part of Mega Man and platformers in general since the dawn of time, and they will be again in the future. And I don't mind gimmicks in a level so long as they're used sparingly and efficiently, and sometimes the gimmicks work, sometimes they don't. In the case of X6, a lot of these gimmicks do not work, and a lot of the gimmicks that don't work dictate the pace or theme of entire levels, which slows the game down somewhat. And then some of these gimmicks permeate the final stretch of the game to make life even more miserable. And mind you, I have all of this to say about the level design before I even touch on the central gimmick of X6, the much maligned Nightmare system. The main threat of the 6th episode of Mega Man X is the Nightmare phenomenon, an artificial virus resembling a tentacled creature that infects Reploids and rewrites their DNA to turn them into something vile, but not that vile. This makes rescuing Reploids essential this time around, because if a Nightmare grabs a Reploid, they are corrupted and lost forever, along with any benefits you would have received for rescuing them. And the game does keep track of all the Reploids you've saved or lost, so you'll have to reload a previous save in order to try again, assuming you didn't save after the fact. So you kill Nightmare creatures not only to keep them from infecting any Reploids you have to rescue, but also to collect Nightmare souls, which increases your rank and enables you to equip any parts you may have acquired. Grab the soul quickly as they appear, or else it will shrink and respawn into another virus, and souls only form on the first kill, so no grinding for souls on the same spot. You've got to find fresh Nightmares you didn't kill to collect more souls. And the only time souls will regenerate is when a new Nightmare effect takes hold of the level. Which brings us to the Nightmare system. So you start a new game, you play through the intro level, and you get to the stage select screen for the first time, and it's the same old story. You pick a stage, you choose to play as either X with armor or without armor, the latter option being somewhat pointless given the levels were designed with certain skills in mind that vanilla X lacks, and thus another reason why these levels are the drizzling shits, but I digress. And you either play through it and you manage to clear the level, you beat the Maverick boss, you get its weapon, you save your game, or you completely shit the bed. Maybe you decide to start on a level like, I don't know, Metal Shark Player. You find a split path, you take the alternate path and realize how much of a bad idea it was because you needed an item to traverse onwards and you don't have it. So you want to backtrack, but the game won't let you, so you have to waste all your lives to get a game over, and yeah, that's another stupid thing in X6, but I digress once more. So whenever you exit a level, whether you beat the level or not, it does not matter. Certain levels on the stage select screen will be highlighted in red, which denotes a Nightmare phenomenon has taken effect on that level. The effect depends on the level you last played and only affects a couple other levels, but it usually changes the condition of the Nightmare, whether it be adding blocks to impede your path, surrounding you in darkness, thus reducing your overall visibility at certain points, or introducing some nuisances to chase you around, among other things. Once a Nightmare affects a level, it sticks around until some other Nightmare effect comes along and changes due to your visiting some other level. As best as I can tell, there's no way to purge these Nightmare gimmicks from the level and restore it to its original state, so eventually all these levels, all 8 of these terrible, terrible levels, will have some sort of Nightmare effect, and thus the only way to play these levels before the taint would be to start fresh, as it would only take a couple of levels to eventually infect the whole lot. The intent behind the Nightmare system is essentially to mimic the level-changing mechanic of Mega Man X and to a lesser extent X3, wherein beating one level would affect another. What made that mechanic work in those games is that the changes made sense. Beating the airship level, for example, in X1 would result in its crashing into the power plant, thus causing a power outage throughout that level. Meanwhile, beating the power plant level in X3 would turn on the tunnel lights in the ice level that would melt all the ice in the tunnel. And the purpose of these changes was not only to change the dynamics or to connect these worlds on some superficial level to make it seem like a larger world, but to open up possible alternative routes that would usually lead you to extra items. In the case of this game's Nightmare system, the changes are more of a nuisance than anything. The initial impression of seemingly random crap tacked on with no rhyme or reason. How else do you explain having to dodge giant ice balls within impossibly narrow passages, while a layer of fireballs hail from the sky at seemingly random patterns? I can appreciate the idea, but it just doesn't work. It feels pointless, it's an added layer of frustration on top of already horrid level design, and it just feels like a lazy attempt at artificial difficulty. Okay kids, we got this level with a billion spike walls and pits, but we need to make this harder for those hardcore fans. Hey, I know, let's toss in a bunch of random rocks and shit flying all over the place. Yeah, we'll show those fuckers who complain our games are too easy. And that is probably the biggest takeaway from X6 that I got. It comes off as such a lazy cash grab. Because even though they wanted another Mega Man X game to cash in, it didn't seem like they wanted a quality title, but rather one that was put together as quickly and cheaply as possible. It's why you have things like leftover Japanese vocal tracks, piss-poor translation with typos and phrases that make no phonetic sense, these shitty levels that are over-reliant on horrible gimmicks, pits and spikes, and a gimmick that adds more crap on top of the crap you already have to deal with. Just from the North American perspective, both X5 and X6 were released within the same calendar year, and while a year between releases isn't an immediate death knell, not everyone can pull off a Sonic 2 and amaze people with a far superior title. Hell, even Mega Man 6, the last game in the classic series to grace the Nintendo Entertainment System, and essentially treated as an afterthought by Capcom at the time, ended up being a solid title with a couple new toys to play with, so I don't know, but again, I digress. So aside from the Falcon armor that you start off with, which gives you an air dash, a screen nuking Giga attack that's easily forgotten about, and a shitty charge shot, there are two new armors for X to acquire, the Blade armor and the Shadow armor. Much like in X5, you'll need all four parts of the armor before it can be enabled, you know, for security reason. Just the one apparently. Anyway, the Blade armor is the more versatile armor, better charge shot, can charge special weapons, improved saber swing, and it's got a Mach air dash, which means you could dash in any four directions. A step above X3's air dash, but below Prime Falcon armor's flight ability. The Shadow armor fills the Gaia void of being more heavy duty, immune to spikes, is incompatible with special weapons and lacking in the air dash, thus making certain levels impossible to complete with this armor, but shoots shurikens at odd angles, has a way better saber swing, and can even cling to ceilings. So your mileage may vary on the quality of armor in X6, and to be fair, they serve their function well enough given what the game offers, which isn't much. But I was never a fan of the armors in this game, and always felt they were a step down from what came before. Hence why, when left to my own devices, I'll put in a cheat code to unlock the Ultimate Armor, which is essentially the fourth armor with unlimited Nova Strikes, and the fourth armor I feel is the best armor in this PlayStation trilogy, with its plasma shot and hovering ability. And yes, Ultimate Armor is a cheat-only thing again. There's no hidden capsule to get this armor anywhere in the game, it's just put in a cheat code and boom. Which makes Vanilla X's inclusion even more baffling because that poor bastard can't do anything worth a damn. Especially during segments where there's a sizable pit to traverse and you can only reach the other end with an air dash and, well, Vanilla X no-do the air dashes, so you're pretty much fia-sucked. Oh, and Black Zero is also available via cheat as well, so that's something. Actually a step above regular Zero due to having a couple extra buffs here and there, but regular Zero's no slouch either. Now he has a double jump by default, his buster shot is considerably improved, less wind-up, more punch, certainly better than in X5, but similar to X's Saber, nowhere near as versatile as Zero's signature moves, which isn't much, but certainly a step above the weapons you gain with X, which are largely useless, but I did some... Actually, you know what? Yamark option isn't so bad. It's a shield variant, so that's something, I guess? At this point, what else can I say, really? Controls are about as good as they are in the previous PlayStation entries, which isn't anywhere near as tight or as solid as on the Super Nintendo games, but they get the job done, I suppose. The core platforming aspects are still pretty solid, even if the levels around them are kinda trash, and some of the boss fights are a bit of a drag and kinda shit, but whatever. Par for the course, I suppose. Aelia returns to provide intel during your adventure, but this time, whenever you see this icon in the corner, you can press select to hear what Aelia has to say, or you could just continue without the interruption. Yeah, so that's another improvement over X5. Graphically speaking, Okay, let me get the positives out of the way first. The illustrated sequences that comprise the cutscenes are well drawn and clean looking. Nothing fancy or anything like that, but they look good. The sprite work is pretty decent, with X sporting some cool looking armor and the enemy variety being pretty solid, with the Mavericks in particular looking pretty sweet, the giant robot in the straight line level, I like that design a bit, and I think Zero got a bit of an upgrade in his animation with some of his moves, which is minor but noticeable. Even the blocky font for the text is a step above X5's slanted font, even if the text using that font is not particularly inspired, shall we say. And the opening video montage ain't that bad, but when it comes to the level design, the visual aesthetics of these levels, I'm sorry, but X6 is a hideous looking video game, and a lot of it has to do with the overabundance of pre-rendered assets that look pretty bad even by the standards of the time, whether it be foreground assets with a glossy sheen, mid-boss designs that are horribly uninspired, or some of the really awful background settings. It's certainly fitting that you have ugly visuals to go along with these ugly levels. Just about the only high point in X6 that stands tall is the soundtrack. Well, okay, other than the Shotaro tunes that open the game if you let the opening intro video play out. Now, I don't care what anybody says, these tunes have aged poorly, and even back in the day during my younger years, I thought these were just bad songs overall. The more recent Legacy Collection release dropped the Shotaro tunes and replaced them with some generic sounding music, likely due to the licensing issues since the Mega Man X collection from 2006 still had those Shotaro tunes. And while the new opening tunes aren't great, they didn't make my ears bleed, and thank fuck for that. Right, so the rest of the audio. A lot of the sound effects are predictably recycled from the previous games, but there are some new ones as well. There's a nice variety of musical pieces in terms of tone and scope, with some standout tunes like the moody piece in the intro level, setting the desolate stage for the experience before you, in more ways than one I suppose, the dynamic and heroic Infinity Million theme, or the porntastic boss theme, and then there's some lesser pieces like the Commander Yamasasa's lounge music theme, or the white noise that passes as Ground Scaravich's theme. There's even a couple remix tunes from prior games, as well as a couple recycled tunes from X5. Because sure, why not? So yes, if it hasn't been already evident in the few clips that I allowed you to listen to, the cutscenes have Japanese voiceovers for some reason. Maybe they were going to do an English dub and they never got around to it, they forgot to take out the Japanese dubs, or maybe it was just a matter of fuck it, who cares, people talking in Japanese is better than a droning beeping noise that plays out when the text is typing. I've heard people complain about this aspect, but really I don't give a shit. Honestly, when a game like X6 has so many other problems that hurts the overall experience more, a leftover Japanese dub track is the least of my concerns. Overall, Mega Man X6 is not very good. It really isn't. Is it the worst game in the Mega Man X series? Some would argue yes, and I would say no. It really isn't. Because for all my frustrations with the level design being wretched, I wasn't left with a sick feeling like I was with X5. Hell, for all the game's issues, there are some aspects of X6 that are done better than in X5. Notably a better ranking and parts system, more manageable Alia conversations, an urgency to rescue them Reploids and sometimes getting proper compensation for it, and most of all, no random circumstances determining whether you get a good ending or a bad ending. So I cannot give X6 too much grief. Just enough, however, because while there are some marginal improvements here and there, it's ultimately undone by the lousy level design, the flawed nightmare system, the less than stellar presentation, the less than inspired arsenal, the lame duck saber, and just the overall passionless nature of the whole experience. Yes, this is ultimately a lame duck game thrown together as a last gasp on a dying platform before moving on to the next big thing, but that doesn't mean you can't put some effort into it and turn in a quality title. Again, Mega Man 6 was the last game on NES, largely an afterthought and lacking polish in some places, but was still a solid game, and it seemed like some care was put into it because that game was not miserable. At the end of the day, is Mega Man X6 a game worth playing? It depends. Hardcore Mega Man completionists would probably give this a go if they haven't already, but for the more casual players of the franchise, I wouldn't touch this one until playing the earlier entries first. Without question, Mega Man X6 is the absolute low point of the PlayStation trilogy, but as far as the worst of the X series, well, the worst would be yet to come. But that is another story for another time. Of all the games not to have a slow-moving elevator segment, it had to be this one.